this video, we're going to continue with our performance comparison between the last official release of 3D Coat, which is version 3.7, and the newly released version 4. We're going to pick up now in the Voxel sculpting room, but before I go any further, I want to quickly explain the reason why I'm using the earliest build of 3.7 is because, again, that was the last official release. All the other builds subsequent to that were beta builds, and a large majority of those builds were essentially version 4 beta builds. So I didn't want to convolute the results. I wanted to show the difference between the last two, major versions, or major releases, I should say. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to our comparison test. So what I have here is a humanoid figure that you can access from the splash screen menu in version 4 when you select voxel sculpting or surface mode sculpting. I did a little bit of practice in the head area, obviously, so what I'm going to do is work on surface mode here in the head area because I increased the resolution after using a split tool to divide the head and the body. Okay, and it's a lower resolution level on the body. If I zoom in and toggle wireframe, you can see that. Much more dense in the head area. Okay, so I'm going to start off in voxels, and I want to make sure that CUDA is unchecked. Oops. And the reason for this is because I don't want CUDA to skew the results. The performance improvements are not related to CUDA. It's largely the multi-threading enhancements and just a lot of internals. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to select the body layer, hold Alt key while clicking on the visibility icon, and that will isolate that layer. Okay, and I'll choose the build brush, choose the second brush draw mode here, a little bit of gradient, and a gradient brush alpha. Let's say I want to build up the chest area here. I found that in my testing here that for some reason this particular build, again, this is well over 2 years old, I believe. This particular build for some reason is providing this artifacting, and even if I bring up the fall off quite a bit, it doesn't really get rid of that too much. Okay, so I'm just going to ignore that for now. I'm sure it got fixed soon thereafter, or maybe it just could be having issues with, it's an old build using a new Wacom driver, so that might have something to do with it. I don't know, but I do know this is not existent in version 4, and I don't recall it being existent for too long. I don't even recall it being existent at all at the time. So again, I just ignore this. You can smooth it out. Yeah, I don't recall this occurring, but if it did, I'm sure it got resolved rather quickly. So, okay. So let's look at our frames per second in the lower left-hand corner of the user interface. That gives us some barometer that we can go by. However, I think the best way to gauge this is to keep an eye on the white crosshair in relation to the yellow circle. Everything inside the yellow circle, except for that crosshair, is basically your brush engine. So when that crosshair gets out to the edge or beyond, just like with painting, okay, it gives you an indication from a viewer perspective that there is some lag occurring. And that's because the little crosshair is your actual mouse or stylus position in real time. It will not change. There won't be any lag in that. But if that yellow circle is not staying, if it's not centered on that little crosshair, then you can tell there is some lag occurring. You can see that that little crosshair is getting out to the edge and sometimes beyond it. choose airbrush. Basically continues to build underneath your cursor as you apply pressure. And you can see our frames per second tend to be between anywhere between 30 and 70 frames per second. So it's dropping down to 30 just now. And what will happen is a lot of times you won't see a real indicator while you're brushing, and it'll change as you let up, and that usually will give you a clear indication of the frames per second as you were brushing. So it seems fairly lively here. If I turn CUDA back on, I can choose CUDA Smooth Boost, and that would give me a pretty big boost when smoothing. So if nothing in CUDA really seems like it makes much of a difference, that CUDA Smooth Boost definitely does. Or you can always cache your layer, and 3D Coat will really, you'll notice a big spike in performance when you're working on your proxy. Okay. So there we have it on the voxel side. I'm going to hide that and switch to the head. Now when I'm in surface mode, CUDA is not applied. Okay, it just works with voxels, and that's because of the dual calculation that occurs: the turning on and off of the volumetric pixels, and simultaneous remeshing as you're brushing. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a little testing here in surface mode. And again, this is a much more dense object. If I hold the wireframe, you can see. Let's use the build-up brush. Okay, if I press a little harder, it gets me a little better response. Our frames per second is quite low. It dropped down to about 28 there for a second. 34. Let's try Rapid 2. Some of these brushes are actually faster than others, much faster, and that's because some of them are just no-nonsense brushes. They don't have to take into account any gradients or fall-offs, things like that, and so it's just real straightforward brushing, and that's it. And you can go in and smooth thereafter, much like if you're working on a real clay model. You put in some dollops and do some rough forms sculpting, and then go in and smooth thereafter. It's really not liking these larger brushes for some reason. Okay, so I think that gives us a little bit of an indication on surface mode. It really does not like these large brushes for some reason. Okay, so actually the large brush issue was something we raised in the paint room earlier, And as you can see, sometimes, at least prior to version 4, it was problematic when sculpting as well. So let's go ahead and switch to version 4. I'm going to go ahead and pause and fire it up, and you can see I'm going to use the very same model here. Okay, so I'm going to click on the same model. And hide the other parts here that you can see. Alright, so I'll do the same thing, same procedure with the body. I'll hold the Alt key. I'm clicking on the little visibility icon to isolate that. I'm going to hit the S key to bring up the symmetry panel, and I'm going to just hide the symmetry plane. I'm not going to disable symmetry, I'm just going to hide the plane so it's not obscuring my view. Okay, so we're in voxel mode again. Make sure CUDA is turned off, and let's try the build brush again. Okay, and you can see straight away our frames per second are much higher in the 200s, and sometimes they'll even be in the 300 to 400s as we're working. And this is without CUDA, and you can see the cursor position stays relatively centered as I work. If I increase the brush size, the frames per second drop to about 100 or so. And again, keep an eye on the cursor where its position is. Okay, sometimes it gets out to the edge, but in general it stays closer to the center. Okay, so again, this size of brush was a little bit problematic in version 3.7. And let's now enable CUDA and CUDA Smooth Boost. Keeping an eye on frames per second. So you can definitely see a stark contrast in the frames per second. Okay, so let's go ahead and hide that layer. Choose the head. That's in the surface mode, so CUDA won't be involved here. Use the build-up brush, same type of brushes, brush alpha and draw mode. You can see the frames per second, 2 to 300s. Basically what I'm getting is this is the type of performance you typically, in 3.7 you would typically get whenever you cache your layer and you're working on a proxy version of it, you know, a much lower resolution proxy version. This kind of performance is typically what you would normally experience, and yet this is not a proxy. This is you know, still a relatively high resolution. model here. I could do a lot of detail work at this level of resolution. So yeah. So let's try some larger brushes here. No problem at all. And some improvements here as far as smoothing came with live clay, and that is the ability with your shift key or your control shift key combination to utilize some different types of smoothing instead of just standard smoothing. You have these different types, and there's a video that covers this in greater detail. This video can be found under the featured demos playlist on the 3D Coat YouTube channel, and I mention these because they can actually help speed up the brush performance whenever you're smoothing. So I'm holding the shift key and while I have powerful smoothing enabled, and so that gives me a better kick in performance when trying to smooth out my object. Okay, let's try Mud 2. I really love this brush. And in that previous build that we saw on 3.7, we did not have the ability to turn noise off. Here we do, and when you turn it to 0, you get a really fast brush. It's just lightning fast. Okay, and Rapid 2 is another brush like that. And you can change to fall off, and when you have a brush with all the settings that you like, you can create a preset. Okay, add a preset, and then you can save an entire set of them. Okay, so performance wise, let's also look at live clay real quick. This is one of my favorite brushes, and you can see even as it's tessellating, it's going to do a very good job performance wise. You can keep an eye on the frames per second. And so crease clay by default will actually both indent and pinch at the same time. So it's really doing three functions. It's indenting, pinching, and it's also tessellating. So let me go ahead and turn wireframe on so we can see. And even with all that going on, you can see it's real time. It's very fast. The smaller the brush, the more tessellation. Okay, we can even do that in the lips here. Create some really tiny creases. This is perfect for wrinkles and so on. You can even invert the tool action so it's actually, instead of indenting, it's protruding. In this case, I don't want it to be too sharp, so I'll change my brush alpha, and I'll change the depth amount because I want it to be somewhat subtle, and it's just that easy. It's pressure sensitive too, so you just lightly touch it as you go. Okay, we'll turn that off, go back to my sharp brush alpha. Let's go back in with the shift key held down and smooth those out. So I hope this gives you an idea of just how much improvement has come with version 4 regarding performance, both in sculpting and in texture painting, and throughout the entire application. I'm not sure if I've showed this already or not, but just even little ordinary everyday things like switching from room to room, you can see it's almost instantaneous. Whereas before you might notice anywhere between a 1 second lag to 3 to 5, sometimes even more. And a host of small little laggy issues, including the retopple room, among others, have all been resolved in this release. So I hope this helps enhance your work experience in 3D Coat, and we thank you for watching.